Get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
What if financial resilience and financial crime prevention were part of the same mission? Welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens. Today I'm joined by Julia Chin. Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Tony. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story and how did it lead you to focusing on the human side of risk?
Well, I think that you know, I I would say that if okay, so maybe I should start by introducing myself. Is that you know, I have spent actually over 30 years in financial inside financial systems, audit, banking, forensic investigation, compliance, risk management. I've seen money from almost every angle, I think, and worked my way through just about every corner of the financial world. Now, here's the one thing, the most important lesson I ever learned about finance didn't come from a boardroom or a textbook. It came from when I nearly lost everything. Well, life happens. So now, through my consultancy, JFourth Solutions, I help organizations build risk and compliance culture using framework which I developed called PULSE, which stands for People, Undertaking, Leadership, Structure, and Ecosystem, with the aim to actually protect people, not just tick boxes. And so I tend to write and speak about the human side of financial crime and financial resilience. So yeah, and to get ready before life happens. So when it comes to this, generally when I talk about this is where how do we protect the where I was okay, so I've seen actually, as I mentioned, for most of the time I was looking at money from inside out and from institutions perspective. How do we protect the bank? How do we satisfy the regulators? How do we manage the risk? Then COVID hit. Then everything flipped. I lost my job, single parent, 3 kids depending on me, and suddenly I wasn't thinking about compliance framework or regulatory requirements anymore. I was sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., couldn't sleep, doing arithmetic, basic maths. If I pay the electricity bill, can we still afford the groceries? And then if the car breaks down, what do we do? And I had knowledge that most people don't have, but none of that mattered because I had no buffer, no emergency fund, no cushion to absorb the shock. So that's when I actually recognized the difference between financial access and financial resilience. They're not the same thing. And I learned about protecting institutions need to be translated into protecting people, real people, people like me in that moment, educated, experienced, and still completely vulnerable. So that's why, and this is what actually drove me to talk more about the human side of financial systems and being having been on both sides in as an expert in the boardroom and as a human, a mom at the kitchen table. So yeah, that's where I am today.
Yeah, well, that's incredibly deep because I think a lot of us who are professionals in the business and, especially those who've worked with regulatory or, as you mentioned, with corporate, is that there's a disconnect with what consumers and the people we serve are going through. It's easy to say, well, we need to pass this law or we need to enforce this action or whatever. And then there's the reality of what people are actually dealing with. And I think that's often overlooked.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of times when we talk about money and financial systems, there are usually three voices that dominate the conversation. First, you have the regulators. They're saying, here are the rules, here's what's allowed, here's what's not allowed. Then you have the institutions, the banks, insurance companies, financial services firms, payment service providers, and they are saying, here's our product, here's what we are selling, and here's how you can give us your money. And then you have the technology, the fintechs, you have your crypto, your blockchain, your stablecoin now, the apps, the platforms, and they're saying, here's how to do it faster. Here's how to do it in your phone. Here's how to automate everything, right? And then all these three voices are so important, but I think there's something that has been forgotten, and which is the fourth voice, which is why I started the fourth perspective, which is the perspective of the human. That person actually trying to make sense of everything that is around us, how we can protect our family, our loved ones, build our future, and also not get tripped off in the process. Is about, putting the human back into the center of the conversation.
I love that. Putting the human back at the center of the conversation. I'm also noting that down because I think that is so important because I think we do forget that, when we're working, either on a regulation or we're talking about enforcement actions or when we're talking about product sales, is that, there's all these things that go on in the background. And yet, we don't talk about the actual people and how it's actually going to impact them. So, one of the things you and I were talking about pre-show is about financial resilience. Could you go into a little bit more about what is financial resilience?
Well, I don't know where this quote came from. I would say that I think it came from one of the banks. So let's start with the three economic or financial modes. Every day, every day, rainy day, and one day. So when we talk about financial resilience is how at any point in time, are we able to withstand the pressure? Is whether or not we are hand to mouth, which is every day, or we have some buffer that we can, in the event we lose a job or something happens, we are able to withstand that kind of pressure. And of course, one day is the part where one day we can own a house, one day we can do certain things. So that means you have a longer buffer. So being financially resilient means that you have to have a buffer. That's actually what I would always think about, which mode we are currently in.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing when we talk about a buffer is that can be, it means so many different things. You read here, it's like, 90 days of expenses. Here you read this, but life is not always, so clear cut. So what advice would you give to people who are thinking about like, okay, so I want to be financially resilient. I want to be set up. What do you recommend to people to think about when they're setting up this fund or coming up with a plan?
Well, there's one term that we say, we don't do it over just have that kind of buffer overnight because life happens. So
Mhm.
we may not be able to have that kind of a rainy day buffer so easily. We need to start thinking about understanding budgeting to help us to build that rainy day buffer. We also need to understand debts, how we can avoid the traps that keep us stuck in everyday mode. We need to understand scams to help us protect ourselves for and also what we have built, right? Because I think one of the biggest concern that we have nowadays is actually we may have the rainy day buffer and it just goes overnight. I've had my friends and loved ones being hit by that. Even the one day savings, or you call it uh, the nest with eggs inside, they got stolen away from using the fraud and scam. And also actually understanding our rights to push back when something is wrong. And I think that's where I feel that if all of us are able to have that kind of understanding, is also it will have a ripple effect. And if we are financially literate, we model it for our kids. We can spot it with our parents if they are being targeted. We can be the person that our friends call on if something feels not right. Um, it actually is where if we have the knowledge, we have the financial literacy, we would not just protect ourselves, we protect our whole circle.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, is that I think that having knowledge does protect you. And, if we think about, something, let's say outside of finances, because finances can be tricky for people, is, if you know something about, let's say, grocery shopping and prices and things like that, you're going to be more forearmed when you go shopping because if you know that eggs are normally $1 a dozen, which I don't think they are anywhere in the world anymore, but let's say eggs are $1 a dozen, is and somewhere is charging you $5 a dozen, you know that that's probably a bad deal. And so, again, sorry I brought money into it. However, I think that we know that having some knowledge does tend to protect you. So I love where you're going with that.
Yeah, it is about having that we know whether or not something is reasonable. And it comes also to the point where, well, it's not just about whether the price is higher or you think that is a good deal. This is also where we sharpen our noses to be able to smell if something is off. It's like if something sounds too good to be true, chances are they are, right? So it works both ways.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, though. If something sounds too good to be true, it's probably got an issue. And I think that's something that we tend to forget. And I've seen that in my own work is that people sometimes buy into that story. They think they're a little smarter, and that's what scammers work on is, Julia, I've got this great deal and, we're the only two who know how this works, but don't tell anybody else because it's a secret. And, I
Yes.
mean, I'm sure you've seen that one before, that playbook.
Yeah, that's a very typical one. We call it isolation. So, one of the saying that I love is that if you haven't been scammed, it just means that one hasn't been created for you yet. So it does sound rather harsh, but it's true because, scammers don't target our intelligence. They target our emotions. And, it's actually the same techniques that help people build good financial habits, the small steps, emotional engagement, the trust building over time. You know how the apps nowadays work, with all the behavioral analytics put inside. Or then you also have the urgency you talk about. Just now you talk about, don't tell anyone because it's only you or me. It's well, professionals fall for scams to people who should know better. The scammers are actually not smarter than the victims. They're just better at exploiting emotions.
Yeah, and that's it. It's all about the psychology and the manipulation. And, as you point out, anybody can get scammed. And some very wealthy and smart people, we can go back a few years in the United States to Bernie Madoff, who took advantage of, some brilliant people. And these things do happen. And as you point out, it's just because you necessarily haven't been targeted by the right scam. So it is about protecting yourself with some knowledge. So, one of the things is, that we talk about financial inclusion. I think you mentioned that financial inclusion can also help reduce financial crime. Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, I think this is especially so when someone is in an everyday mode and they are worried about being able to put food dinner on the table tonight. And this is how people get exploited. They are more vulnerable. So, say for example, a mother who has a sick child and she's already in everyday mode. And this is actually quite a common scenario that we see is that if you're already in an everyday mode and then you have a sick child and someone offers you, okay, can I use your account for and to transfer some money through, and for every $1,000 that I use your account, you get to keep 100. Do you think that parent would say yes to it? If my child is sick, I would. So this is why financial inclusion and financial crime are actually connected.
Yeah, that is very spot on because when people, I don't want to use the word desperate, but when you're in that mode where you're trying to protect your child, you are more likely to do something that you think is going to benefit the child, and that's where you might miss or overlook one of the warning signs because you're like, yeah, maybe that's a little bit off, but I really need this to be successful. And that's where it gets pretty scary because, again, that goes back to what you were saying earlier about the vulnerabilities. And that's what scammers really pick up on is they find the vulnerability in your defense and they attack it. And it makes me think of sports is, I used to play basketball and what you look for is you look for a vulnerability in the defense. Is a defender turned one way so you can exploit that and go the other way? And that's, to me, what scammers are looking for. They're looking for that little hole that they can thread to take advantage of somebody.
Yes, the vulnerability can be in any form. It could be emotional. It could be that the parent needs the money. And there's something that has always also in the past 2 years we have been talking about is about looking at ways to give people that dignity of choice. Sorry, to the choice to live with dignity, to be able to put food on the table for their family. And what does that look like? I would say that first is to give people jobs.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the word dignity. My most downloaded episode is called Financial Literacy and Dignity.
Oh,
By far, it's my most downloaded episode. And so I think there's a lot to that, is that we can provide people with dignity. So as we talk about that and we talk about financial systems, is what advice would you give to organizations and regulators to think about, providing people with dignity through their work?
yes, yes. I think this is where the challenges are at the moment, is where a lot of people are being displaced by adoption of AI. I actually just wrote about this couple of days back. I did a post about it, and which I highlighted here. So just look at the trees. When it for those timber companies, normally what they do is that there are certain countries that are regulated where if you cut a tree down, you have got to replant. Is that happening with people who are displacing jobs or people from jobs? Are these people being retrained for jobs or to prepare them for the future of work? So that is, yeah, I use the same concept as replanting, whether people are actually getting that, so that they are able to get themselves back into work.
I love that. Are they being replanted? Because we're not addressing that in my mind very well as a society, is that these changes are coming very fast. And we can look back when manufacturing and machines came in and the Luddites, who are destroying machines because they weren't able to adjust to the new technology. But that happened over a longer period of time, where right now we're seeing some of this displacement happen just so fast. And there's not really been organizational planning for like, how do we, and this gets back to the financial inclusion, how do we, as societies, eh, you know, uh, help people overcome these changes? So it's fascinating to talk about this.
Yeah, I think this is probably where I felt that a conversation with you is rather thought-provoking, because we now know that we need to do something about it. Is also to throw the question out there, how do we solve it, as a society, as a community? I think it's not just about, people looking at saving costs by using AI, but look at how we can also build the entire society together.
Yeah, that is such an important issue that we do need to come together as a society, in our different countries and around the world and start addressing this. And it is a global issue. And I don't know if any one country can solve this on its own because I think AI is also going to, personally, in my opinion, is break down some of the traditional, uh, I don't know, borders in certain ways. Is that we don't, in my mind, we've created an alien super intelligence and we don't know how it's going to do. And, from things that I read, I don't know, what your take is on it, but I think that a lot of people don't, even the smartest and most well-read people on AI and those involved really still don't know what AI is going to do and how it's going to impact people.
Well, I am not very tech savvy, and to me, AI still very much feels like a black box. But having said that, I am not against it because it helps me a lot in working faster, more efficiently. It helps me do my brainstorming work as well. It helps me to get information data much faster than I would normally do on my own. But yes, I think that there is still a lot that we need to understand about AI.
Yeah, and I think it is going to drive financial crime, unfortunately, because AI can, to get back to what you said earlier, is you just haven't been hit by the right scam. And that I think AI is going to be used and is being used to target more personal scams, unfortunately, that are designed to take advantage of your individual vulnerabilities, and that can be done at scale, where it's pretty scary. So one other thing I want to touch on real quickly before we wrap up is, you know, what can individuals do, those of us who are working in financial literacy. A lot of the audience for this podcast are financial literacy advocates around the world like us. Is, what advice would you give the advocates who are working with people? Either they're building financial literacy nonprofits, they're regulating, they're teaching people. What advice would you give them for thinking about, building financial resilience, or encouraging financial resilience for their communities?
Well, I would say that each community will have their nuances, and I will go back to what I advocate is to think about the three C's of human superpowers. Now it's 3+1, but let's look at the first three C's. One is curiosity. Stay curious, stay cautious. That is important because, I think that given that I don't think there will be a one size fit all, neither will there be a silver bullet to financial resilience, but to stay curious and to stay observant. The other one is to stay compassionate. And by compassionate, it's not just about being able to empathize, but also to be able to contextualize something that makes sense to me in Asia may not make so much sense to anyone from Africa or from to the Americas or to Europe. So be the compassionate here also means to be able to contextualize and to also stay creative. Stay creative is not about being able to draw, but about being able to connect the dots. So I think all these having all these three C's of human superpower, I feel is something whether or not technology is going to take over the world, humans still need to continue to train our minds to do that and to remember that we are humans at the end of the day. And of course, the fourth C is the most difficult one. It's called common sense. It's not so common. But I mean, it sounds very conceptual, but I think that if we look at it from a human superpower perspective, we'll be able to see that, hey, let's stay human, let's stay curious, let's stay creative, connect the dots, and let's stay compassionate and have some common sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. And For me, yeah, common sense is a huge part of it. I think stay curious for me is a whole point of my work is to help people ask better
Mhm.
questions, but also that's a challenge. If people aren't curious and they don't ask questions, they are more likely to get scammed. Is
Yes.
scammers don't like to be questioned. And that is a good way to catch a scammer is just to keep asking them questions because sooner or later they're not going to want to answer. And that is a red flag. If you're dealing with a legitimate, let's say, financial planner, they're going to answer your questions, to some degree, but it's the ones who don't answer questions, or start to hedge on the questions. And that's the common sense is
Yeah.
like, okay, why are they not answering my questions? Why, like to get back to our isolation scenario, why do they not want you to talk to somebody? Why? And that's a question. What are I think they said for journalism, there was a who, what, where, when, why, and how.
Yep.
And when you answer those questions and you ask those about financial services, and I think that's the other thing too, is that for most people, they're overwhelmed by the thought of financial services and products, and so they don't practice those three C's of their human superpower.
Yeah, actually, when you talk about the asking questions, right, I want to also share this experience that I had. This was during the early days when bots just came into the market, probably about 12 years ago. When it was when I actually, I don't know how it happened. I stumbled on a bot and it started to, we were chatting. It was actually the beginning of it was Skype. It was during the days of Skype, and we were chatting, and then I kept asking question. I kept asking question until I jammed the bot. So
Okay.
it was quite hilarious. I wish I had kept some of the screenshots because I just felt that, oh, how did I manage to jam the bot? What I meant by jamming the bot was where I kept asking why? Why do you say this, right? Until it started to go back into the questions and the comments that it gave me earlier. It's just when you were talking about why and how and all that. So basically, staying curious is, yeah, sometimes staying curious. Well, the blessing was that it actually jammed the bot, but it was quite funny.
Yeah, I
I
don't
didn't
know if
know
you
it
could
was a
do that
bot.
to I don't know if you could do that to a bot anymore because they've gotten just so amazingly smart, but it is a little scary, is that, I've helped I use AI to help do the show notes for the podcast. And one time I forgot to paste in the person's, title and occupation, and the bot very confidently made up a title, occupation, and company for my guest. And and it's so confident. And that's the thing. That's what scammers are like. Not saying that the bot was trying to scam me, but it filled in that information that it thought I wanted. And that's what scammers do. They fill in the information that they think you want because that's what the bot said. It said XYZ person, founder of this firm, and it's like none of that was true. I just forgot to paste in the name and title, and it was insane.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I think it is actually about being able to understand all this hallucination does happen, and also to remember that AI is a double-edged sword. It can work in our favor, and well, bad guys use that too. We know psychology, we learn psychology, we use behavioral science for our, to encourage and nudge saving. AI is also, or behavioral science is also being used at the other end to scam people. So what can we do? It's all whatever that we do, the good people do, the bad people are also doing the same, but for different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. And, but it gets back to your superpowers. So, Julia, to wrap up, I have what are called the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. These are three quick questions that I ask all of my guests. The first one is, what's one myth about scams that you're trying to break?
I think the myth that it only happens to gullible people. This is the most dangerous belief out there. People think I'm too smart to fall for scam. And that belief, that overconfidence is exactly makes them vulnerable. And the worst is that because they felt so confident that they will never get scammed, there's also the shame factor to also consider is that they will never, this, which is why fraud and scams are underreported. And then
Ye-
the mental health issues come in. So it basically the myth is it only happens to gullible people.
And that's what I've heard from so many people that I've had on the show. And I know from my own experience that scams happen to very well educated, very smart people, very capable people, is that it really does happen to everyone, and that overconfidence can always be an issue and everything. And it's easy where I've seen is that people are very skilled in one area, very knowledgeable in one area, but then they're not as knowledgeable with their money, but they think they're as knowledgeable. And that's the danger, is when you think, hey, I'm really smart and I'm really well accomplished. So, that applies to everywhere, is that I think you have to understand your limits, and that will
Yeah.
help you.
Yeah. The moment you think that it could never happen to me is the moment you're most at risk.
Exactly. It's so hard. So Julia, let's get out the time machine for a minute. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about scams, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, I would say that two things to build your rainy day before the storm and have a seat at the table. What I mean by having a seat at the table is that, I wish I could speak up more. This is very personal. I was painfully shy when I was younger, too introverted to speak out, too hesitant to talk. So I gave a lot of excuses to stay in the background. And so now I think one of the things is to tell her is that your voice matters. The concerns that you're afraid to raise, these are often some of the more important ones. The questions that you think are stupid, someone in the room might actually need to hear that. So I would say, take a seat, ask the question, and to ask for help. I think asking for help is not a weakness.
Yeah, asking for help is not a weakness. And keep going back to just what you said, is people thinking, this is a stupid question. And we can all think back to school where we didn't want to raise our hands, because we didn't want everybody else to think we're stupid. But that usually means there's other people in the class or the room who are thinking the same thing and just afraid to not ask that question. But it's worse to not ask the question. Um,
Especially nowadays, especially when you think about the amount of investment scams that are out there, it's important for us to actually ask the question and maybe even talk to our friends and say, hey, do you think it makes sense?
Yeah, and that is really the thing, and that gets back to exactly what we said, is that is one of the reasons why scammers isolate people, is because they don't want you to run it by somebody else who's going to say, hey, wait a minute, I see a hole here, because that person is not talking to the scammer, so they're not being manipulated in the same way. So they're able to get a different perspective on it and say, well, wait a minute, there's a hole here. So, Julia, the final question is, what's your number one insight to help people get ready before life happens?
Number one insight is to know which mode you're in and to protect that transition point. Uh, because most people don't realize how close they are to slipping backward. You just need to have someone in hospital, someone who loses their job. So I think to really do some soul searching on um which mode you're in, uh, and well, you may just suddenly find yourself at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. doing maths.
Yeah, unfortunately, it can happen to anybody, and it can happen very quickly, which is, just something for people who are watching and listening. Possibly by the time this show's published, I have a new program coming out to help people create a financial readiness plan. So I do
Yeah.
have a tool. So if you're subscribing and listening to this podcast, you'll be able to get access to that. So Julia, where can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, I am very active on LinkedIn, so I would love to keep the conversation going. And that's where I regularly post about financial crime, financial resilience, and the human side of money. So do connect with me there. I love to share feedback and share people's stories as well. And basically, the fourth perspective is my LinkedIn newsletter, which comes out fortnightly, where I explore the human lens of financial systems, the stuff we talked about today. We can continue that conversation there as well. And of course, you can also get me on my website, which is www.JFourthSolutions.com. There's a story about the name, but well, you will get that on the from the website as well.
Well, fantastic. And then also, you have a Substack. And so, for everybody watching and listening, there'll be links in the show notes if you have access to the show notes to Julia's LinkedIn newsletter, profile, website, and to her Substack in the show notes. So, Julia, thanks for joining us on Get Ready Before Life Happens.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony. And yep, you've all got this, and we will not have to figure this out alone.
Yeah, we're not alone. So that's fantastic. And thank you everyone as always for tuning into this episode of Get Ready Before Life Happens. If this conversation made you rethink how you view risk and inclusion and resilience, please be sure to subscribe and to share with a friend. You can also go to my website at tonystewart.com to join the Get Ready movement and get access to my newsletter and other resources. Because when life happens, the way you think about money matters.